They say you never really know what you have until it's gone, and that's sort of how I feel about this little time capsule of a phone. This is the original iPhone SE. It was released back in 2016, and it had the same internals as the iPhone 6s with the form factor of the iPhone 5s. That means a tiny, by today's standards, 4-inch screen, a home button which is a real button and not just haptic feedback, and the design language of the iPhone 4. This right here is the space gray variant, although this did come in a few different colors like silver, rose gold, and gold. I actually bought the rose gold colorway when it came out back in 2016, but what's your favorite color? Let me know in the comments. It has a headphone jack underneath, rest in peace, and it has a lightning port as well, good riddance. On top you have a power button, and on the left here you have volume buttons and the mute switch. It has 2 cameras. On the back you have a rear 12 megapixel shooter which can actually record up to 4K 30 FPS or 60 FPS on 1080p. On the front is a front-facing 1.2 megapixel camera. It's just fine, it's not great. What I can say is that even today, this phone feels like a premium device. I really love this small form factor, and I wish more phone manufacturers still took this form factor seriously and actually developed and built them. It's super easy to use with just one hand. The internals here, as I said, are similar to an iPhone 6s, has the A9 chip, 2GB of RAM, and I have the 64GB variant. Although I know this came out in 16 gigs. That was the one I bought years back, and 16 gigs in 2016 was not nearly enough. I filled it up very quickly. And I think they also came out with a 128GB variant. Now in terms of software, this is now just up to iOS 15. Specifically, I think I'm on iOS 15.8.2. Okay, just a correction, it's actually 15.8.3 and I have the 32GB variant. So it's now 3 versions behind, unfortunately. But you know, these are just the specs on paper. Let's see how it works in daily life. So I slapped on the rattiest yellow case that I could find, and I used this as my main phone for a few days. Can I still survive with a phone from 2016 in 2025? Let's find out. I just caught the language and phrasing that I was using there. How crazy is it that I'm saying that I can't survive without my smartphone? Alright, we're back after a few days, and this is how the phone's performed so far. So the main thing I was worried about was software and how it would actually perform. Surprisingly, even though it's on iOS 15 compared to iOS 18, which is the current release, there's still a lot of apps supported. Like the most mainstream social media apps like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, they still all work. Although there are going to be some apps like YouTube Studio, for example, where it'll just say this requires iOS 16 and up, and I can't even download it. One thing to realize is that no one really builds for this screen size and form factor anymore, and so you might have some examples where the content of the app might cut off. But for me, I didn't really mind. Basic tasks like social media, emails, messaging, they worked fine, albeit just a bit slower than normal. One thing I did notice was that it seemed like Apple's first-party apps like Safari and Maps performed better than Google Chrome and Google Maps respectively. That probably makes sense, so if you were planning to use an older phone like this on a more permanent basis, probably best to stick to Apple's first-party apps. The other thing is that this is only on 4G, it doesn't have 5G, cue the 5G conspiracy theory memes, but that does mean that pages load a bit slower when you're on the internet. Usually though, I'm on Wi-Fi, so I don't really notice that much. The other thing I was worried about with this one was the keyboard, and surprisingly, even though this is just a 4-inch screen, I was still able to type at a decent pace, like 60 words per minute, which is pretty close to my usual typing speed on a phone. So that wasn't as much of an issue as I thought it would be. Now, onto the camera. I wasn't really expecting much from this camera, given that it's 9 years old. I know digicams are sort of cool again, and this phone's pictures sort of remind me of that vintagey vibe. Definitely still very usable, like here are some sample shots. I even put them side by side compared to a phone that has a reputation for having a good camera, my Google Pixel 7a, and what do you think? Do you see a significant difference here? This quality does significantly decrease in lower light conditions, which is to be expected by something this old, but I don't know, I kind of like it. And if you want to see a video sample of this, you can check out this video I did right here where I just filmed and edited a whole video on an iPhone SE. Another thing is that this phone has NFC. but it only has it for payments, which I found pretty weird. Like, they enabled NFC but just for payments and nothing else. For me personally, this is what makes this a bit of a deal breaker and nigh unusable, because my office requires NFC to get into the office, and I'm not about to go through the painful process of requesting for an exemption just because I am testing out an old smartphone. Now, in terms of gaming, I don't really know why you would use this phone for gaming or why you would buy this specifically for gaming, but I tried anyway. So I loaded up Temple Run. I still suck at it. It works. And I tried to load up a modern game like, I don't know, Pokemon Unite, and that was not that easy. But it runs. It just doesn't run super well. Just be wary of overheating because this phone's on fire, so it's probably not for long-term gaming use. The main reason, actually, aside from the screen, that you wouldn't really consider this for gaming is also the fatal flaw of this phone: the battery life. For all of the praise that I have heaped on this phone so far, nostalgia tinted goggles aside, this phone's battery life sucks. When this phone was released, it was very common to have phones that you needed to charge 2-3 times a day. I remember buying this brand new in 2016, and I needed to charge this phone twice a day, and my line of work at that time required a lot of chat. Like, we had Google Hangouts back in the day as our primary chat app, and this phone's battery would drain so fast. Now, with my phone today, I'm at 93% battery health, which I'm surprised this phone has lasted this long with this battery health. I took it off the charger at around 850, and by this time right here, I needed to charge it already. So this is definitely a phone where you wouldn't have peace of mind that you would last the whole day without needing to charge. So I never leave the house without a power bank, which sort of defeats the purpose of a super tiny phone if you need to lug around a separate power bank just to have peace of mind. Now, I know that we have talked about phones not really advancing too much in technology over the past decade or so, but I think one thing that phones have done really well nowadays is all-day battery life as table stakes. For Apple though, this really only started with the iPhone 11 model and later. Models before that didn't really have all-day battery life. And just being practical, that's probably one of the reasons why I wouldn't really use this phone as a day-to-day device in 2025. So, all things considered, who would I really recommend this phone for today? Honestly, no one, unless you already have this phone and you're holding on to it and you're happy with it. I wouldn't really recommend you seek this out unless you're a bit of a collector and you just really want to try out old devices. The battery life sort of necessitates that you're tethered to a power bank, and the lack of software updates just means that this phone is gonna get more and more updated as time goes on. You might also want to get this phone if you want to reduce screen time, or you might want to use this as a digital minimalism aid. The smaller form factor is less distracting, and it's almost like the slowness of it becomes a feature because it's not as instantaneous when you want to pull up social media or something as addictive. And because of the subpar battery life, you sort of want to conserve the battery a bit more, so you're not gonna just mindlessly open it and scroll and scroll and scroll. Now, I don't want to end this review on a negative note, so instead of that, let's just take a moment to celebrate how far we've come when it comes to phone longevity. The fact that a phone from 9 years ago is still actually usable and functional sort of bodes very well to the future. More and more phone manufacturers are committing to way longer software updates. I'm feeling optimistic that we can sort of break this expected upgrade cycle. I don't think phone manufacturers are ever going to not release a phone every year, but hopefully more and more people buy phones with the goal of keeping them for a lot longer. I mean, if we just compare, right? This was released in 2016. I wonder if around 2016 people were still using the first gen iPhone. I don't think so.